increase by 30 or 40% as the population is, but because of our economic activity, our wealth, and our preference for different foodstuffs, then we're going to double our requirement, half of which is coming from population, and half of which is coming from our increase in our wealth and the economic activity that led to that. So enormous changes happening for different reasons in our world. The first thing is our height is increasing and we're consuming more food as a consequence. At the same time, declining fertility and our increasingly living sedentary lives in urban settings are decreasing. So we have two pressures taking us in different directions. Let's look at women for a moment. The role of women in most of society in the world is pivotal, and yet we invest in and provide opportunity for women in many parts of those worlds well below the influence they have on producing and distribution of food. And that's one of the things that we will be managing, because we will need to manage over these next few decades, is involving women more centrally in the provision and production of food and all that entails. So becoming more prevalent, it would be women farmers. I mentioned before that we're eating different foodstuffs. We need about 11 plant calories for every calorie of meat we eat. You probably knew that anyway, being involved in farming, but we need about 11 plant calories for every 1 calorie of meat. You need about 4 plant calories for every 1 calorie of poultry you eat. And the world is doubling the amount of meat it's going to eat. So you can see the massive influence that has. And by and large, it's the developed economies are eating less meat, or forecast to eat less meat as we change our diets in the opposite direction. But the majority of people don't live in that world. They live in this developing world, and they are going to increase the amount of meat because they can begin to afford to buy a chicken. They can begin to afford to have meat in their diet, and they're going to do that if things carry on as they are. Now, the consequence is that the grains that feed the people or feed the animals that feed us are set to increase in price dramatically. 40 or 60% or 115, 117%, depending on our belief on our ability to manage the issues arising out of climate change and access to potable water, fresh water in the world, which of course is the one thing that's going to drive an awful lot of activity over these next years, because it's the one thing we can't dehydrate and move very easily. So, what are we going to do about that? A number of sciences are going to come to our rescue, which they have done a number of times in the past. Nano market is set to increase in the next 5 years, never mind the next 60 years, quite dramatically from $2 to $15 billion worth of business, increasing the quality, if you like, and possibly the quantity of food that we can produce. Aquaculture is set to increase 500% to keep pace with the demand. Now, I don't know if you have tractors for dealing with fish, but if you do, then this is a good market to be in, because the demand is already moving to about 40% of the world's fish supply is managed farming. And that's set to increase dramatically. So what else is changing around us? I mentioned the halal movement a while ago, where 37% of the world's population are likely to be halal by way of culture, if not faith, Muslim population. And that market is moving from about 650 million to about billion to about 850. So a 30% increase in that business alone, providing halal meat. And of course, you know the issues that that very often has in cultures when people start talking about stunning and draining of meat and all the other things that go on with the halal agenda. It's not an inconsequential issue, and it's going to involve more people considering what we do about that over the next few years. So what about consumers? I've been asked to talk about consumers for a while. Let's talk about this big change that's coming. We're moving from an era where the G7, the G8, the G20, if you like, have traditionally run the world. We set the standards, we set the governance, we set the rules, and we are the economic leaders. We're now moving to a world where the E7, the emerging 7, which I've listed up there, the emerging 7 are overtaking the West, the developed economies, and will set their rules and governance for how things are done in the future. And by and large, they're not the same rules that we would have developed over the last 1,500 years as industry started. So this period is going to be a period of change of ownership, of governance of the world. It is not a period of business as usual. In fact, if you go back in your history books, you'll find in 1820, China was the largest economy in the world. And if you go back to 1820, you'll see the list of countries and the order in which they were economically dominant is very much what we're forecasting the next 2050. So 200 years, we've gone back to pretty much the same countries, pretty much being in the same place they were in 1820. The only new ones is the United States. Everybody else is pretty much shuffling back to where they were. So what does that mean to us in business? Well, number one is, if you want a large market, go to where there's 5 billion consumers. That's going to have a certain amount of say in where primary markets are going to be for a lot of people and a lot of product. Or you can go here to a shrinking market, which is Europe. So we have some very interesting change in terms of our priorities and where our launch markets are going to be. On the other hand, average income in Asia, if you take the whole region as a whole, is lower than Albania. Albania being the poorest country per capita in Europe. So 5 billion of all of Asia's activity, consumer behavior now, 5 trillion, and $17 trillion US of the developed countries' economic activity. But it's the pace of change, it's the momentum, and the increase of disposable income that's making the big difference. And that's nearly all right now in Asia and the developed economies. In fact, in 4 years' time, Asia, the whole of the Asian economies will be larger than the US and Europe combined in real terms. So this isn't something that's happening in 60 years' time. This is happening in your next business plan. Your next 3-year plan, this will already have happened. Okay, so China, as everyone talks about, okay, it's roughly 5th largest consumer economy at the moment, moving to about 3rd in the next few years, and within 5 years, it will be the 2nd largest consumer economy in the world. So somewhere very much worth targeting, of course. So what are consumers feeling? During the recession, in many countries that were hit by the recession, and we don't have time to examine that very closely, we all had a good time. That's really what that's saying. We traded up, we increased the quality of brands that we engage with, etc. We had a great time. Then came the crash, and we learned to economize, to use coupons, to drive down cost in our personal economies as well as our business economies. And of course, we moved to preservation primarily, and we're beginning to move out of preservation into expansion. And of course, we're looking forward now to a time where perhaps consumers are feeling more bullish to spend money again, but want a different type of transaction and interaction with their providers. More responsibility, more vigilant, more demanding of a price break, a discount, a coupon. I mean, a question to ask is, how many of you pay full price for dinner at any restaurant? Most fast food restaurants, if you go online, Voucher Cloud or something, you'll get your meal for half price. Anybody who's not doing that is crazy. You're substituting other people. So the tools are there, and most people learned to use them during the recession. The other thing is, women are taking over. Now, they always have had control of the consumer market, haven't they? But in true terms, you know, the income power of women is increasing to about 18 trillion in the next few years, and controlling 70% of all worldwide consumer activity in the next few years. So don't sell to men anymore. They haven't got any money. It's the women, number one.